Hey everyone, welcome to Everything's Messy podcast. I am your messy host, Sarah. Joining me today, I have Dana Kay, board certified health practitioner, best-selling author, fellow podcast host of Soaring Child, Thriving with ADHD, and founder of ADHD Thrive Institute. Hey Dana, thanks for coming.
Hi, Sarah. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yes, I'm so excited to have you. We were chatting a little bit before I hit record, and I think there's just so much, you have such a wealth of knowledge that you can share with all of us. And so, as we get into it, you obviously had something in your life that brought you sort of down the messy path that, got you to, be a best-selling author and founder of the ADHD Thrive and all that. So, why don't you jump off there and tell us the messy?
Yeah, I just have to say that I love the topic of messy, and I love what you've named this, and your vision and your what you're putting out into the
Thank
universe,
you.
because life is messy.
It is.
And when you layer on children with neuro issues and divergence and different type of children, it can get even messier. And look, believe it or not, I was actually completely removed from this space, this health and wellness space. I was actually an accountant in a past life.
Wow. In a past life.
I'm
I like that.
I do like to say that as a little girl, all I wanted to be was a businesswoman with a
Sure.
big office and a big high-powered job, that my dreams came true. I had my office. I was living my corporate life, and I'd planned to stay in that field if my life didn't get messy, which it did. And look, when my son was born, he was a great baby. We didn't have any major issues, but my concerns over some of his differences just grew and grew as he grew up, and he used to suffer from very dramatic meltdowns, and
Mm.
he had so much more energy than it seemed like every other child out there, and he used to bounce off the walls. And my gut told me there was something going on, and
Mhm.
I'd ask the teachers. I'd say, do you notice any differences in him? And they'd always tell me, no, he's just a boy, totally normal. But eventually his tantrums became sort of more severe, and his teachers started noticing differences as well. And he was diagnosed with ADHD around the age of just before 5, so he was still
Mm.
4. It was quite early, and we were immediately put on medication.
Oh,
And at first, like, between you and me, and I'm sure you can totally relate, I remember feeling really relieved by the diagnosis.
sure, sure.
Um,
Because
I
now at
thought,
least
God,
you
look,
have a path.
I have a path, and I wasn't the fault, the reason. I
Hmm.
wasn't a bad mum, and that medication was going to be the pill that would fix our
Mm.
family. Um, and we were finally getting the help that we needed, and so I bounced off into that drugstore as quick as I could, and filled that prescription and gave it to my son at the first opportunity. And at first, things were great. Until they weren't.
Hmm.
And we went back to the doctor, and the dosage increased. He was on dexmethylphenidate, extended release, and I think he went from 5 milligrams to 10 to 15 to
Mm.
20. And then he started experiencing all of these side effects. His meltdowns and tantrums got so much worse in the afternoon. He wasn't able to sleep. He wasn't able to eat. He lost weight. So we went back to the doctor, and he prescribed another medication to counteract the side effects of the first one, and then a third one.
Mm.
And then when we went back to the doctor with some more side effects of the fact that my son was now suffering from terrible, terrible anxiety.
Oh,
He was 5 now,
yeah. Oh my
and
goodness.
a shadow of what he used to be. He's such a beautiful, outgoing boy, and he just wasn't that person anymore. And the doctor handed me a fourth prescription, and
Mm.
that was that moment where I really started to question, is this the right thing to do? I just couldn't do it anymore. There was always that doubt that was pushing through, but I'd always sort of push it down. No, the doctors are right. Trust the experts. they
As
will be
we all
doing.
tell ourselves, because at that point, I'm sure, and a lot of us, we don't know any better. We don't
No,
have
yeah.
anything to counteract whatever they're telling us, and we assume because they went to medical school, they're going to have the answers. And who are we to question that, right? And
Yep.
so but you can't deny a mother's intuition. You
Hmm.
just can't. And I want to back up a little bit too. Are you in the States? Where are you coming from to us?
I am. I live in Seattle, Washington. We've
Okay.
been here for 10 years. I know I don't sound like it.
No,
Originally from Australia.
I just wanted to make sure because maybe there would be differences depending on what country, but no, that's good to know. So yes, please continue.
Yeah, look, and I think that I had this one moment in Costco. I think that that was my really, really messy moment. And it was one of those days in Seattle. If you know Seattle well, it is known for its rain.
Mm,
And it was raining constantly. I think it was like a Sunday afternoon and it was grey and it was cloudy and pouring with rain and everyone was getting on everyone's nerves at home. And so I was like, we just got to do something different. Put my son in the car. We went off to Costco and, shopping, and he wanted a snack before we paid for it. And I said, no, we have to pay for it. And this resulted in the biggest meltdown
mm,
that, we've ever experienced. If you can picture two glass pasta sauce jars
mm.
smashed
Oh,
all over the supermarket floor, him sprawled in it, kicking and screaming. I was mortified.
oh,
I was just looking around me, and all I could see was people sort of diverting their gaze. I overheard a pregnant lady say, "Oh, I'm never going to let my child do that." Little did she know until she has a
right,
child,
right. And the judgment that comes with that. And I just want to say really quick too, for those that don't know, there is a big difference between a temper tantrum and a meltdown. And the way that it was described to me is in a temper tantrum situation, more than likely, you can somehow, not that you should, but you can somehow bargain or reason or, something's going to get through to them
Mm,
if that's really what it is. Whereas in the case of a meltdown, they're almost catatonic. It doesn't matter what you're saying.
yep.
They are not, there's no reason, there's no logic. You just have to brave the storm and let it ride because nothing's going to stop it.
Yeah,
So
I
for the
love that
judgmental
you explain.
looks,
Yes, I love that you explained it that way. And you're so right. It's kind of like when there is that meltdown. Uh, I call it like flipping your lid. That yeah, your amygdala brain, it completely shuts off. They flip their lid. There's no getting through to them, and that's exactly what happened in that moment. But in that moment, I flipped my lid too,
mm,
and I lost it, and I burst out crying
oh,
right in the middle of Costco, and I was thinking to myself, like, why me? Why does my life have to be like this? And that
mhm,
was really the moment that completely changed my career path. I went back to school. I did my holistic health and science degree, multiple specific certifications in this area, nutrition training, and kids with ADHD. And I really learned how I learned many things, but I really learned that how food can affect so many aspects of our lives. And I began to learn that ADHD symptoms can be reduced naturally, and that a lot of the driving factors by the uncontrollable ADHD symptoms is driven by inflammation.
mm,
And I was like, this was eye opening to me. And look, if we fast forward to today, my son, he's thriving. He's 15. He hasn't been on meds for years. He is in high school. He is a straight A student, except for one B this year, which he's not very happy about. But for me, I do not
you're
care. That is
okay.
not what I worry about. For me, it's that he's happy. He
Mm,
is a well functioning teenage boy, as well functioning a teenage boy can be.
yeah,
But my family's happy, and we have this peace and this calm in our house, as much as you can have peace and
sure.
calm with two boys.
Sure.
So, and all those boy mums out there will know what I'm talking
Sure.
about.
Yes,
But
yes.
look, once I learnt this, once I saw the changes that this could have on my own family, I really just couldn't keep this information to myself. I didn't want anyone else to have to go through the struggles that my
Hmm.
family went through. And I've been lucky enough to help over about 1,300 families
That's
to date.
amazing. That's
Yeah,
amazing.
to get to that same place as me, but just so much quicker, without as less much stress and much sooner
Sure.
as well.
Sure. You did the messy work for them.
Yeah.
I like to say I like to jump down all these rabbit holes. I have no idea where they're going to take me, but eventually learn something down each and every one of them that keeps
Yes.
leading me down other paths. And I'm like you, once you find that information out, you want to scream it from the mountaintop because you know it's going to help somebody else. And so that's just amazing that you've been able to help so many families. So as we are talking about this and now your son is thriving and that's wonderful, did you start, after you got your certifications and all that, did you start with like an elimination diet? Did you start with like, what were like the first pieces you put on the table?
Yeah, look, that's a really good question. Um, I don't teach what I did.
That's
Because
okay. That's okay.
I did it really the hard way. So
Yes, yes.
I learned from all of the mistakes, and now I teach a much better way. But a big part of that is, food first. And I think that if we start there, when children are diagnosed with ADHD, the first course of treatment that most doctors suggest is medication. And many of them don't even tell you that what we put in our body will drive so much of our health, can significantly impact our ADHD symptoms. And that's what happened with us. He was diagnosed. Doctor didn't mention anything else, only
Of
gave us
course.
medication.
Of
And
course.
so, when I really started learning about the effects of food and also learning of the effects of food on our gut health, because we'll talk about gut brain connection soon, but I really started to map this out to say that, you know, we should approach this as a food first approach. It should be like that for anything.
I was
I'm
going
not
to say
against
across the
medication.
board for
Across the
everything.
board, I'm not against medication.
Sure.
There is a time and place for it, for sure. But it shouldn't be the first course of action, not
Or the
when
only
food.
thing.
Exactly, exactly. And not when food can sometimes be even more effective with no side effects. I mean, who doesn't feel better when they eat better?
Absolutely.
It's,
Absolutely.
and
Yeah.
so I think, I like to go with that first. It's not the only thing, but I really like to say, like, why don't you just try food? If parents want to reduce ADHD symptoms, we need to think outside the box and do much more than just giving them a supplement or a pill. Supplements can be effective, so can medication. But if we and our children continue to eat foods that are processed and inflammatory, ADHD symptoms are not going to go away because these foods are what are exacerbating them. And
Hmm.
so, food first for me means rather than sort of trying to find that magic pill that's going to fix your child, we clean up the diet instead. And in doing this, we reduce inflammation and then symptoms start to reduce because we're really getting to the bottom of what's causing these symptoms in the first place. I often think of it like this: when you're building a house, a solid foundation isn't optional, is it? It's a
Right.
necessity. If you don't have a solid foundation, the house isn't going to be very strong, and it's exactly the same way with us. Diet is our foundation. If our diet is poor, we can never function at our
Yeah.
best. And so, one of the first things I did, along with a number of other things at the exact same time, was I changed his diet. But I cut out on day one gluten, dairy, soy,
Mm.
artificial flavors, artificial colors, and over 40 food sensitivities.
Wow.
Let's just say I had multiple panic attacks on the floor, um,
Curled up in a
uh,
ball, rocking back and
many
forth.
times. What am I going to feed my family? This is so overwhelming. That is not what I teach. And that's why I just wanted to say that is that, like, a big part of it is diet, but a big part of it is also working out what else is causing inflammation in that body. And we do that through many different aspects, including lab testing, supplements,
Sure, sure.
reducing toxins and things like that.
Definitely. And so as we're, in this 2025 era and we hear a lot of talk about MAHA and how they're removing some of these dyes and things like that, I think just in my own experience and experimental stuff with my own children, I did see significant improvement when I did remove those dyes, right?
Mhm.
My question would be, are you at all concerned with, as they move forward and maybe try to eliminate more dyes, what they're going to replace it with? Are we hoping that they're going to go to a more natural existence, or is it just going to be labeled something else and we're still going to be getting these dyes secretly? Because I think as moms, we're busy. The convenience factor is very appealing. And, they bombard these kids with every possible food you could possibly imagine with all of those additives in it. It's really hard to always say no. It just is.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think that's it is a big concern because if you actually look at natural flavors, which is what they replace it with, natural flavors, you can slap on a natural flavor, ingredient on an ingredient label, and the consumer has absolutely no idea
Right.
what's
They're
in
not
there.
bound to tell you what's in it. Yeah.
No, but it has got to have started as something natural originally. But it can go through all of
Yeah.
this chemical processing in the
After it gets
meantime, in
bleached,
between.
after it gets, I mean, you never just
Exactly.
know.
And
Yeah.
so you are right to raise that concern. What are they going to replace it with? I mean, look, I think that the industry is starting to change. I think consumers are starting to become a lot more aware. And, I always take the view of like when you're reading a back of a packet, if you can't pronounce it, put it back.
Move
If
on.
you've got, yeah,
Yeah.
if you've got more than five ingredients on the label, put it back on the shelf. And so if we can really just focus on, I'm definitely not one of those people who are like, you should only eat whole foods. I'm a busy mom. I
Sure.
work. My husband works full time. My kids are busy. I don't have time to cook everything from scratch. And I'm going to be the first to say, I do not like cooking. I do not want to be a gourmet chef, even though this is my field. Um, there are ways that you can still give whole, nutritious foods to your kids without you being a gourmet chef. And if we can just reduce the amount of packaged foods that we're relying on or choose better for you packaged
Hmm.
foods, then we're just taking those little slow steps to be able to sort of reduce the load on our children's body. I can I share this analogy with you?
Yes, please.
I one of the biggest things that contributes to ADHD symptoms is inflammation. And inflammation, like that word's thrown around a lot, and it really is, you know, the root of every disease and disorder out there. I talk a lot about ADHD, but you could apply it to pretty much anything.
Hmm.
And so, if we look at this little trash can I've got here, for those that are viewing via video, I'm holding a little trash can. For those that are listening in audio, I'm holding a little trash can. And so, we're all born sort of with this metaphorical trash can in our body. And our goal through life is just to keep the load on the trash can low. Just like we've got a trash can in our house, we put rubbish in it, garbage, sorry, and we take that trash can to the side of the road every Monday so the garbage truck can pick it up and empty it. Our bodies are designed to do the same thing. They're beautiful things. And so there's garbage that comes into our body, like poor diet, toxins, pesticides, medication, and that
Stress.
stress. That's a major one. But as that trash continues to grow in our body, if our body can't empty that trash out every Monday, then that trash is going to fill up and fill up and fill up. And when we can't empty our trash, that means our detoxification pathways are compromised. Our body should be able to, but a lot of us either have poor genetics or our, detoxification pathways are compromised for whatever reason. And so that trash is going to fill up. And then what happens when that trash can's in your house and you can't empty it? You're
Yeah.
going to have a pretty dirty
It's going
house.
to be messy.
It's gonna be messy. That's why I just love the name of this podcast so much. I think it's one of the best ones I've ever come across.
Oh, thank you.
Uh, and so it's going to be messy, and that's going to be inside our child's body. And so we really just need to reduce the load on the trash can. And if
Mm.
we can just take a blanket approach, not doing everything 100%, because you're not gonna, realistically, we're not going to be able
Sure.
to eat
That's just
100%
sabotaging
healthy.
yourself. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. So if we can take, more of that scattergun approach to say, well, where can we reduce it in little bits so that load can go down? And what can we do to optimize our detoxification pathway so we can continue to empty it? Our body can start to clean up. Our body can start to thrive. When you've got all that trash in your body floating around, what do you think it's going to do to your ability to
Mm-hmm.
focus?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You got
No, it's
trash
gonna
up there.
terrible.
Yeah.
So, talk a little bit about, you're talking about inflammation, and then you had mentioned that you eliminated gluten. So, are we
Yes.
talking gluten is just inflammation for the gut? Is it also the brain? Is that when you're dealing with ADHD, is it both of those?
Yeah, look, I mean, gluten, the way that it's processed these days is it's not wheat what it used to be. It's not what it used to be. And it's interesting. I was talking to someone, it's not just about what is in that wheat, and it's not just about the toxins on that wheat. It's also what they actually take out of that
Mm,
wheat when they process it. They take out all the nutrients, they take out all the vitamin and minerals. So it's really nothing more than milled up flat cardboard. And so, that gluten in itself does a myriad of things. It can break down the lining of the gut. It can cause something called leaky gut. There are peptides inside gluten. Two of those are called glutamorphin and protonorphin. And if your body starts creating antibodies against those peptides, then that glutamorphin and that protonorphin, they actually bind to opioid receptors in the brain. Opioid receptors are the same things that are involved when you have things like morphine. So if you have a look at glutamorphin, morphine, and
wow.
so gluten can actually create these opiate like instances in the brain in some people. And then what happens is if you actually go on a gluten free diet and you've got these antibodies, you're going to go through a glutamorphin withdrawal response
I
in
bet.
exactly the same way
Yeah.
you would going through a morphine withdrawal response. But the good thing about withdrawing from gluten is that those instances they may get worse before they get better, but they will get better. And once you get over that hump, that inflammation starts to reduce, those opiate like responses stop happening, and then you can start that healing process of like what can we do to our body to get it back to where it needs to go. So gluten has multiple things in it that can create inflammation. It's also how it's processed with glyphosate, which is a pesticide
Yeah.
that can break down the lining of the gut. The gut brain connection, in particular, in relation to ADHD, is huge.
Right.
And I don't know, have you talked about that gut brain connection much in on the
Yeah,
podcast?
so I actually refer to it. I've often heard that the stomach is the second brain. I've gone so far to say it's
Mm-hmm.
the first brain. It is the first
Yes.
point of contact, and your brain being the one that's going to receive the nutrients from the stomach. So it's actually your second brain. And so if that first brain is not firing on all cylinders, if you're messing with it, if it's not, eliminating correctly, or all of these things, the brain up top is just kind of fighting for its life, figuring out what it's supposed to do and adapt to what it's got, and that's not good for anybody.
Yeah, you're so right there. There are so many areas that are involved in that gut function and that brain function. Many parents that I speak to don't think that there is an issue because their kid may not have any gut symptoms. And I've seen it time and time again where, their kids have been on multiple rounds of antibiotics. Antibiotics are great. They obviously are necessary in some instances, but they unfortunately wipe out the good bacteria
Right.
along with the bad, and they lead to these sort of lasting imbalances. Many of the families that I work with have been on those multiple rounds of antibiotics, and this does compromise their gut health. And a lot of them will come to me and say, "Oh no, no gut symptoms," and I'll say, "Oh, have they been constipated?" "Yeah, no, they're constipated. They're on Miralax." I'm like, "Well, that's not normal." But that is a sign. It might be very common, but it's not normal, and it's a sign of an unhealthy gut. And I think the biggest thing, that tells me if someone's got a gut issue is if they're suffering with ADHD symptoms. And that is because there's a couple of different things here. 95% of serotonin, 50% of dopamine, which are our happy, feel good neurotransmitters or hormones that regulate our mood, our emotions, our focus. They're produced in the gut. And emotional dysregulation is a core symptom of ADHD, just like those tantrums and meltdowns that I talked
Yes.
about earlier
Yes.
with my son. But, what if the real issue is that the gut isn't producing enough of these neurotransmitters in the first place? Um,
Exactly.
and so, you can work on the gut. One of the first things that changes, and one of the first things that changed for my son when we actually removed some of these things and did some work on the gut, was his meltdowns and his tantrums started to reduce. They
Mm.
came fewer and further in between. And literally within 2 to 3 weeks, he was a different child.
Wow.
Um, and so I think one of the main things, the frontal lobe, uh, I'm pointing to the center of my forehead for those listening, but this controls your attention, your focus, your executive functioning, your planning, and it communicates with the gut via the vagus nerve. And so when the gut is inflamed or imbalance, it sends stress signals to the brain, contributing to brain fog, which is the inability to focus.
Right. Right.
It
They can't
inhibits,
remember things. They can't remember what they were
yes,
just told. They can't remember what they went to their bedroom for. Like it's just on and on and
yes,
on. And
yeah.
I mean, some people say, well, that can be typical kid behavior, but I don't think so. I mean, if we're really getting down to the nitty gritty of seeing these spike in ADHD cases, especially with this modern day diet and things that are happening, was it different back in the old days? It was to a certain extent, but, you know, kids, had the ability to, work on a farm and do the things that they needed to do. And that shouldn't have, changed with how we
Mm.
are modern day, except for to say the food has changed. Therefore, that has somehow made it, difficult for the kids to be able to do maybe simple tasks or thing like that.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. I think that there's such an increase of diagnosis in ADHD, but is it true ADHD?
Right.
Or is it just a cluster of symptoms that are being exacerbated by underlying stresses in the body, whether that's a breakdown of the gut, whether that's, chronic inflammation, whether that's mold exposure. There's so
Right.
many different
Right.
things that it can relate to. And so, with the increase in packaged foods, increase in all these chemicals, no wonder everyone's suffering. No wonder
Mm-hmm.
there's ADHD on the rise, because you think about what they all do to the stomach, and how that affects the brain. You're going to have ADHD symptoms. You're going to go to your doctor and say, I can't focus. Or your mum's going to feel out of form and say, my kid can't focus. Here is some medication. That
Sure.
medication, it might mask those symptoms, put a band aid on them, but they're actually even further breaking down the gut. And as soon as you
Definitely.
stop them, the symptoms are going to be even worse.
Mm.
So you're 100% correct there.
Yeah. And so talk a little bit about, you had mentioned when you were first noticing the symptoms with your son, there was lack of sleep. And, as moms, we all know how important a night's sleep is, not only for the children, but for ourselves. But
Yes.
as a child is dealing with all of these, gut dysbiosis and all these things that are happening, and now they're not sleeping. And so
Mm.
that's adding to the brain fog and adding to all of these things. How do you get them regulated back on sleep?
Yeah, look, I mean, sleep is one of those core ingredients to helping a child thrive. Like it's like this vicious cycle. The less you sleep, the more symptoms you're going to have. The more symptoms that you're going to have, the less you're going to be out of sleep. And so, a big, I do find that once we can start reducing inflammation, once we can start healing the gut, it's amazing what that can do for sleep quality. If we think about what I said earlier, 95% of serotonin is made in the gut. Serotonin is a precursor for melatonin. Melatonin is our hormone that helps us sleep. And so, if our gut is not producing serotonin, it's not going to then produce melatonin. Then we're not going to be able to sleep. Then we add on things like blue light from technology. Our kids are up for all hours on their phones, and that blue light disrupts our circadian rhythms. If you think back to the olden days, we, not me personally, but I'm old, but olden days,
Sure. Sure.
our great grandparents, they used to go work, in the farm or whatever. They'd come into the house, there'd be no electricity. they'd have candlelight and they would go to bed when it got
Mm-hmm.
dark.
Mm-hmm.
That is the way our body is designed. So our body's actually not designed to be receiving all of this artificial light at times of the day. So, one of the things that we want to do is we want to help regulate those circadian rhythms. We want to get out there into the sunshine first thing in the morning so we can reset that circadian rhythm. And then we really want to mimic that low light atmosphere in the evening as well. It's like, let's turn off the blue light. Let's wear blue light blocking glasses. I know sometimes they look a little bit ridiculous, but all these little things
It
can help.
helps. It helps.
Yeah,
Yeah. I,
definitely.
when we were first going through this, I actually, I think it was a friend who told me, and we were able to put the red light on the back of the iPad. And of course, I'm trying not to have them have that anyway. But if they were
Mm-hmm.
going to have that at night, the red light seemed to take out that immediate blue light. And I notice I do it on my phone at night. I notice as soon as I put on that red light, I can almost feel like a whoosh, like just,
Yes.
oh, it's much nicer. And I think there's some truth in not having that blue light stare at us all the time.
All the time. Yeah. And look at that blue light actually stops you producing melatonin. And
Mm,
so, your body needs to start producing that melatonin at the right time of the day so it can start to down regulate its body. And sleep's so critical, especially for our kids with ADHD and for anyone that's
sure.
suffering, because that is when you do all of your repair, your rejuvenation, your detoxification is happening while we're sleeping. And so, if we're missing some of that crucial things, it's actually going to make it even worse. It's going to make inflammation even worse. Another thing if you've got a kid with a sleep issue, this is going to sound gross, but parasites, they come alive at nighttime.
Mm,
And so I don't know if your kids ever had pinworms, but mine have had pinworms over the years. And so you know how they always say, excuse the language, but oh, my bottom's so itchy,
right, right.
and that's happening only at nighttime. It's because pinworms are parasites
Hmm.
and they come alive at nighttime. And so that actually can keep kids awake as
Mm.
well.
Oh, so much to process. And, my heart just breaks for them, especially when they're younger, because they can't really vocalize exactly what it is. But I think innately they know too, this something's weird, something's wrong. I
Yeah.
shouldn't be like this. And so I think that adds another layer of sort of anxiety because they don't know what to do with it. And,
Mm-hmm.
the parents don't know what to do with it. And so now we're just sort of chasing our tails of figuring out what we're supposed to do.
Yeah, and then that creates internal stress, and that creates family stress, and then that adds to it. And look, I know this is a lot for people that may have not heard of any of this before, but all I'm going to say is Rome wasn't built in a day.
Right. No, it's good.
Um, and
Exactly. It's going to take
you
time.
know,
It's a journey.
it's a
And
journey.
you're going to have to, it's almost trial and error. You'll find something, try it, and may not work. And then you have to pivot to something. I'm like, it's just going to be continuous until you find that right formula because everybody's different. When you talk about the gut,
Mm-hmm.
um, and like adding back the good things, I'm assuming you're talking pre and probiotics and things like that. What is your take on like fermentation foods and things like that?
Yeah, definitely. Look, I mean, gut healing, it's a multifaceted thing. It's obviously not what we just take out, it's also what we put back in. And so we really just want to feed the body with whole, nutritious, fresh fruits and veggies, grass-fed animal protein, seafood, eggs, spring water. It helps us detox as well. But prebiotic food, probiotic food, fiber-rich food are great. Fermented food is great in some instances. If you've got a really if you've got an overgrowth of bad bacteria, sometimes that fermented food can actually like exacerbate it even more. So again, it's very very bio individual. But I will say, there are not many kids out there that want to eat fermented kimchi.
No, no,
So
they don't. They don't.
I very much focus on foods that I know kids are going to eat. My kids eat kimchi, but that's because I've been pushing it on them for
Sure.
10 years. So
Yeah, yeah.
it's a process. But definitely, food is a big part of that. But also getting to what's causing the breakdown in the gut in the first place. Is that I do a lab test called an organic acid test. It really gives me a good overview of what is going on in the body at that particular time. Is there bacterial overgrowth? Is there yeast candida
Yeah,
overgrowth?
candida. Yep. Mm-hmm.
is there C. diff or Clostridia? C. diff is an interesting one. I see it a lot, an overgrowth of this Clostridia in the gut, and it can actually inhibit an enzyme in the body called DBH, which is dopamine beta hydroxylase. And that can lead to a derangement in these neurotransmitters. And so when I see that on a lab test for a kid that's really suffering with meltdowns and tantrums, I'm like, that is the
That's
golden
why.
ticket.
Wow.
And
Wow.
so, there are some times where you just get those labs back and you're like, this kid's going to have so much improvement. Cryptopyrrole is another one. That's not a gut related thing, but that's another one I probably see elevated in about 40% of the kids that I work with.
Wow. Wow.
And what happens with when you've got elevated cryptopyrrole, it's a result of a combination of genetics and oxidative stress, which is like too much inflammation going on in your body, basically breaking down your cells. And what happens is it increases these levels of pyroles in your urine. And there are normal levels of pyroles, everyone's got them, but when they get too high, they actually have a really strong affinity for zinc and B6, and it draws these two elements out into the urine, and so you become deficient in zinc and B6,
Oh,
and which is results in major mood dysregulation, sensitivity to light and sound, tactile sensitivities, anxiety, depression, a lot of these symptoms that relate to ADHD that can come
wow.
alongside it. So again, that's when I see that elevated, I'm like, yes, this is great because this
And
kid is
so
going to
to
have.
bring those levels down, is it just again eliminating the gluten, or is there a
Mm,
specific pro or prebiotic that you recommend that they take?
For cryptopyrrole in particular, we want to bring back zinc and B6, and we want to reduce the oxidative stress. And we do that in a number of different ways. We reduce the amount of inflammation that's coming into the body through diet. We also bring in some antioxidants. So, your vitamin C, your vitamin E, selenium, so things that are going to reduce that oxidative stress. For
Oh,
some kids, it's interesting, it's more genetic than oxidative stress, like it's this balance. And so I've seen families, I've done tests, this cryptopyrrole test for families of 5, and every single family member has it elevated. That that's a strong genetic
yeah,
component,
yeah.
whereas for some kids it's more the oxidative stress that's driving it, that we need to calm down, and once we can do that, they can start to feel better.
Wow. That is just my hair is sort of blown back in the wind of like processing all this information, but I love it. I love it so much. And then just to touch a little bit on, as you go through the nutrition and obviously starting with the food, are we adding, I know kids are supposed to get so much sunlight a day and then also exercise. Is that
Mm-hmm.
the movement has got to be really important, I would think.
Yeah, look, I kind of look at reducing ADHD symptoms naturally as baking a pie, or what we want to do is we want to bake a good pie. We don't have to bake a prize-winning pie, but baking a good pie has a number of ingredients. We've got the pastry, which is the base. That's obviously the diet. We've got the filling in there. There's some of these other things that we talked about. We've got sleep, which might be the clove, and so there's all these little ingredients that we look at, and definitely exercise is one of them. It's one of the most studied, things in relation to reducing ADHD symptoms naturally, is exercise. And so a lot of our kids, we're living, sedentary, or what do you say, call it, lives. They're sitting down so much. They're
Yeah,
not going
sedentary.
out and
Yeah.
playing. Yeah, sedentary. And so they're not moving. Exercise will encourage detoxification. So if you don't move, you've got a high toxic load, or your trash can's full, you're not moving, that's also going to stop the detoxification pathways flowing. And so, when you do
Yeah,
all
we got
these
to
little.
sweat. We got to sweat it out.
Exactly, exactly. So when you do all of these little things to help the child, and you do it step by step, all of a sudden you just start to notice all these differences, and then you're like, wow. I mean, there was someone in my program 2 days ago literally posted inside our private community. I'm trying to remember what she wrote, but she said a year ago her child was in hospital setting because suffering so much from the amount of medication this kid was on because of,
Mm.
ADHD or whatever. And now this kid is winning awards at
Oh,
school. She had to take a kid home because she couldn't have him at school, but now he's back in this traditional school environment,
wow.
winning awards on no medication. She's like, if you had told me a year ago that this is where we would be, I would have said, you're crazy. And so just to watch and witness those changes, and she's just done what I'm talking about. Obviously with guidance, obviously with that step-by-step approach, but you don't have to do it overnight. You don't have to just rip up your whole
Of
life.
course, of course.
We want to do it slowly so it becomes your new normal. And
Right,
when it's your new
right.
normal, it's not hard anymore.
Right. Yeah. No, I always subscribe to the 80/20. If you're doing things 80% of the time, the right way or, the healthiest way that you can, then 20% of the time, if you're enjoying the piece of cake or you're living your life, that's how you're going to build that success. Because otherwise, if you just go completely strict and, eliminate everything and you're, left with your spring water, you're not going to be very successful.
That's for
No,
sure.
that's great. Well, I mean, Dana, so much that you've said today definitely resonates with me. I can imagine it resonates with other parents and people dealing with this. And so, as we're talking a lot about children, really quick, I just want to see these same practices, because I read a lot about, you know, I've just been diagnosed ADHD in, older women, men, those kinds of things. These same practices, I'm assuming, can be applied across the board, no matter young or old.
100%. While I only work with children, everything that I talk about is equally as beneficial for adults. Adults do tend to have a little bit more dysfunction, and it takes a little bit longer because if you kind of think about that, you've been eating this way for X number of years, whereas a child, they're much younger and they've
Sure.
only been eating this way or doing these things for a smaller amount of years, and so you can't expect it to happen overnight. Um, but 100% a person, an adult with ADHD, can thrive without medication and can live a great life.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I will say, I mean, sometimes, and it's no judgment. Sometimes if the medication is needed, then that's what you need to do. Provided
100%.
that you have tried all these other things, are implementing these things, are not looking for the quick fix and, pill for an ill, then, sometimes that is, you need it.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I say to families, like, if you're in a crisis mode, like, you've got to do what you've got to do, and and that's the most important, making sure that someone is stable is the most important thing, and so if you're complete if it, that you're feeling completely unstable in whether your life or it can cause danger or whatever it may be, you've got to do what you need to do in that moment. And that's what I did, didn't
Mm-hmm.
I?
Yeah.
But then as I started to learn and I started to make some of these changes, I was able to slowly get him off the medication, until one day he was off it. And so we didn't do that overnight. It was a
Sure.
process. And we
Sure.
obviously, I always say to everyone, you need to work with your doctor. If you are ever stopping any medication, you don't
Sure.
want
Of
to just
course.
stop it
Of
without
course.
their advice. But 100% there's a time and place for medication.
Yeah. And as your family as a whole, did you implement all of these practices for the family across the board? Yeah, me too.
Yeah, look,
Yeah.
once you learn the damage that some of this stuff can do on health, you kind of just like,
You can't
well,
unsee it.
and also like we feel better for it.
Right.
It's
Right.
so phenomenal to like all the families that I've worked with. You've got some families that will do it just for the child. You've got others that do it as a family, and some of the changes in the parents that I've seen have been just as dramatic and amazing, as the children, and they're just like, oh my god, I feel like the best shape I've ever been in my whole entire life. Like I had chronically high like blood pressure,
Mm,
insulin resistance. My doctor was like, you're always going to have to be on medication, it's just genetic, there's nothing you could do about it. Now they're thriving without it, and so
wow.
it's so amazing to watch.
Sounds so fulfilling and rewarding for sure.
It is.
So, as we wrap up, if, and I know there's people out there listening, if they want to work with you for their children, how can they find you? What can they do?
Yeah, look, you can either find me on my website, which is ADHDthriveinstitute.com. You can go to Amazon and get my international best-selling book, Thriving with ADHD, which is a guide to naturally reducing ADHD symptoms in your child. If you want it cheaper than Amazon, you can buy it on my website. You can save about $25. So definitely check out one of those. I'm on all social platforms at ADHD Thrive Institute.
And I will put all of that in the show notes. And then really quick, your podcast, follows along with what you're teaching. And is it once a week published? Where can they listen to that as well?
Yeah, so that's called the soaring child. Every child deserves to soar, no matter if they've got ADHD or not. We've been doing it now for about 2.5 years. I think we've got over 150 episodes,
Wow.
and we interview guests. I do solo podcasts. Can definitely check that out on all the podcast platforms or on our website, ADHDthriveinstitute.com.
Love it. And I love meeting fellow podcasters. I've always said the podcast community is one of the most welcoming communities that I've ever been a part of. So
Oh.
always wonderful to meet a fellow podcaster. Thank you, Dana, for coming on the show and just giving us all of this information that I just feel so, I like to say, well, I knew some of it and I did know a little bit of it, but not as much as what you were able to tell us in depth. So I really appreciate you sharing and coming on and doing that. And any last words, any last messy words?
Um, Sarah, I just want to say thank you so much. This has been great. As I mentioned, I love everything that you're about. The messy podcast, like the name is amazing. Um, to make it not so messy, I'm just going to remind listeners that Rome wasn't built in a day. And I know that I've said it, and I will say it over and over and over
Yes.
again. And so if
Great
those
advice.
feelings of overwhelm start rising, just remind yourself that you can just take one small step, because that one small step will keep you moving forward.
Wonderful. Love it so much. Thank you so much, Dana.